Good evening, sci-fi fans, and welcome to another episode of Starfleet Tactical. I am having a problem, Pat, unmuting you.
Never mind. There you go. How's that?
Okay, there we go.
I had muted myself just because of making some noise.
Anyway, this is episode 19, I believe, of Starfleet Tactical. I don't even know. And I am broadcasting from Orlando. Yesterday I was in Clearwater. Today I'm in Orlando. Tomorrow I'll be back in Atlanta. And you guys, how's the week gone for all of you guys?
Well,
I'll let you start, Pat.
I've just been.
Does that mean that Chris's computer exploded again?
No,
not at all. Not at all. So just just been a normal busy week, working on rebuilding my deck and all that kind of stuff. So just been otherwise and enjoying the last little semblance of nice weather here in Minnesota. So we're on borrowed time as far as that goes now.
Gotcha. So we're moving into winter in Minnesota.
Winter is coming.
We're moving away from mosquito season.
Yes.
Into winter, right? Because I'm told you have two seasons: mosquito season and winter.
Well, sometimes it's referred to as construction. Just depends on whether you're outside or you're in a car. It's either construction or mosquito season. But yeah, sometimes they can be seen carrying off small children on depending on where you are.
I know. I've been there during the summer.
I figure the mosquitoes in Minnesota are the ones that survived the winter, so they're really pissed. Yeah. And they're clearly not the weak ones that survived. So
yeah, I gather. And Chris, how has your week been?
Busy. This is my second excursion onto YouTube this week. On Monday, I did a presentation for the Georgetown University Wargaming Society. So I was wearing my day job hat. There's this talk on wargaming pathologies, ways that professional war games can go wrong, and they asked me to give that talk. So it was.
Give us the synopsis. That sounds like an interesting topic. Give us a synopsis of that discussion.
So the easiest thing to tell you about is the methodology, because it's a lot of examples. So what I did was this was based on a paper that I wrote 15 years ago. When I was at the Center for Naval Analysis. And what I did is I took the list that Peter Perla included in The Art of Wargaming, where he talks about the elements of a war game. There's a database, there's models, there's players, there's rules and procedures, and a few other things. I took those elements, added the things that Peter didn't include because they're not about the wargaming proper, but they can still screw up your war game. Like you can have facilities problems or stuff like that. And then basically just went down the list and tried to think of all the different ways they could fail. And then in this talk, I basically, for each of those major categories, I provided an example. Most of them were things that I was part of. In at least one case, it was a potential failure caused by me that luckily I had built in some redundancy so that when I screwed up, I was able to recover from it. But it's a talk that I've been doing off and on for 10 years now. And I really enjoy doing that talk, and a lot of people seem to think it's useful. So I do it pretty much at the drop of a hat. So.
All right. Well, tell us about this week's topic.
So we had talked about, first of all, we had talked about going through that warp speed chart from way back when. Pat's done a little bit of thinking about the Balance of Terror episode, and I've done some thinking about, I had done a sort of a cursory overview of some of the stuff that Winchell Chung had about the different elements of warship design. But I did a little bit more thinking about that, and there's a few places where I wish my explanation had been a little bit clearer, and I found a few other things to add on to it. So I'd like to expand on that topic a little bit too. But so that's kind of what I've spent my day working on.
Okay. Well, take it away.
All right. So, Pat, do you want to start or shall I start? Pat, you're muted.
You're muted, Pat.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Chris, yeah, why don't you start? But I did email you. Actually, I should be able to share my screen as well. So, Chris, after you're done, I probably got about 15 minutes of stuff to do. So this way we'll do kind of two separate things. Mine will be specifically Star Trek, and Chris will have a little more real world implications on some of the stuff he talks about.
All right, that sounds good. So Rob Davidoff asked, can I link to the thing if it's public? If you just do a search for Weave and pathologies on YouTube, you can find it. I'll try to put the link in later, but not right now. So, okay, let me...
You could probably find that.
Yeah, WEUVE. That's the important part there. Okay, so... hold on a second. I need to reset. Okay. Hold on a second. Share screen. Boom. Okay, so I've been just adding to the same PowerPoint deck and changing the date. Okay. So first, I thought it might be useful if I just have a little slide about that I'm calling what I'm trying to do here, because we have a tendency. I have a tendency, at least. I will own up to it. I have a tendency to sort of go back to the same topic over and over again. And so one of the reasons, like for instance, I wanted to go back to the Winchell Chung thing is because I thought that it might be relevant again. I mean, sometimes we end up talking about the same thing because it's relevant again. Pat and I might want to go more in depth than we went in before. Sometimes we thought of something new. Sometimes we just want to make sure that people who missed it the first time aren't lost, so it's worth going into it a little bit again. I've yet to really hear anybody complain about us doing a topic that we did before. But if you've got feedback, if people don't like that, then let me know. But the other thing is that I've kind of been trying to, we'll bring up a topic and talk a little bit about it. And then the next time we talk about it, we talk a little bit more about it. We go a little bit more in depth. And so I'm trying to sort of focus in on stuff and sort of expand it a little bit at a time. And so, I think that that's kind of useful. And one of the reasons why I always talk about like real world, real Navy stuff is that, that's my background. And that's kind of the lens that I look at science fiction in general and Star Trek in particular in. So, it's sort of thinking about what I'm trying to accomplish in bringing up topics. I wanted to share that with you so that people understand what I'm trying to do, if that's useful. All right. Let's talk about this warp speed chart. This is something that Alec found and sent me. I actually went out and found a higher resolution copy of it. So this is not the...
Oh, okay, good.
That's not exactly the same one you sent me, but it's interesting looking at some of these, like the differences between these. Warp factor 1 takes you 11 hours to get across the solar system. It's still pretty small. But you eventually get down to, at warp 9.9, it takes you 13 seconds. Hopefully there's nothing in your way. So, but the one thing I have to say that kind of jumps out at me about this warp chart is it reminds me exactly how much I hate the new warp scale. Because it doesn't really do a good job of giving, as an operator, it wouldn't do a good job of giving you exactly how fast you're going. It's not like being able to read it off of a dial, right? The difference between 9.9 or the difference between 9 and 9.9 is huge. It's a factor of 2.
Yeah, it's like above warp 9, it's like an entirely different warp scale.
Yeah, and 9 9 to 9.9 makes it, the fact that it's about a factor of 10 makes it, or a factor of 2 makes it like, maybe it's some sort of log scale, but it doesn't actually figure into that. It doesn't quite work that way. So I didn't, that's one of the few things about the Sternbach-Okuda Star Trek universe that I'm not particularly a fan of. I think they should have just continued the old warp system and just extended the scale out. And if you ended up talking about warp 32, then yeah, go ahead, talk about warp 32. So
it looks like every warp number, the speed doubles. Just looking from left to right.
It's actually a little more than that. So on the new scale, the old scale was pretty easy to figure out. You take the warp factor number and multiply it by itself 3 times. So warp 3 was 3 times 3 times 3, 27 times the speed of light.
I want to say that again because we lost you there for a second.
Oh, okay. So the old warp scale that they came up with, kind of semi-canonish, I guess, was that you multiplied the warp factor number by itself 3 times. So warp factor 3 was 3 times 3 times 3. So totals out to 27. However, this new warp scale is not that simple or intuitive to figure out. And to be honest, I don't even know the math behind it. I'm told that I think I'd have to ask Andy about that, exactly how they do it. But I think there's some complex math in there. But in this one, warp 1 is always the speed of light. Warp 2 in this is 10 times the speed of light. It's that third column on this chart here. Warp 3 is 39 times the speed of light. Warp 4 is 102. Warp 5 is 214. So it's more than twice as fast between warp 4 and warp 5. Then warp 6 is 392. Warp 7 is 656 times the speed of light. And warp 8 is 1,024 times the speed of light, which is, ironically, twice as fast as the old warp scale, which I think was 512. 8 times 8 times 8, whatever that turns out to be, 64 times 8. I think that comes out to about 512. So the new warp scale definitely gets faster. But so when they say the Enterprise flies around at 9.2, it goes, it's a lot faster. But that allows them to move at the speed of plot, because if you look at Where No Man Has Gone Before, for instance, they're traveling roughly from Earth to the edge of the galaxy. Well, that's about 20,000 light years. So, that would be a little bit of about a 40-year journey just to do the opening episode, if you really did the time, speed, distance based on that. So, and the new warp scale doesn't help it. So Star Trek, the time, speed, distance scale almost never actually works. Okay, back to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you end up with some weirdnesses, like warp 1 to warp 2 is a factor of 10, 2 to 3 is a factor of 4. By the time you get to 8 to 9, it's about a factor of 0.5 in addition, right? It's 1.5. And then look over to that across Federation option. At warp 9.2, it says it's 33 years to go across the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, interesting. Now, I should state that I haven't gone back. I just pressed the I believe button on this chart. I haven't gone back and verified any of those numbers because I'd have to do a lot more research into how the new warp scale works than I really wanted to do.
Yeah. Okay, so this across the Federation, it says that's 10,000 light years. If you go by the Star Charts book, it's not 10,000 light years. It's not even close. So,
what is it in the Star Charts book?
I'd have to get it out and start counting sectors, but a sector is about 20 light years. Okay. And, it's less than a few hundred light years, I think.
So there are some elements of the Star Trek universe are very well defined in canon or semi-canon sources, and other parts of the Star Trek universe it's just a Wild West. And all the Star Chart stuff is just a Wild West. And so, like, I was talking with Andy Presby. We're going to try to do a Star Trek Adventures game at some point. and he's trying to sort of figure out where exactly it's going to take place and what the critical stuff is. And he's got like 3 different sources that he's building stuff off of, and they don't match. But that's actually in some ways kind of useful because he's just moving colony worlds around to wherever he needs them for his plot. Because, we know that there are certain distances that are listed, but we never see that information graphically. And so we know that something's like on the border with Romulan space. Is it here or is it there? Our border, the Federation border with Romulan space is really pretty big. It could go in a lot of different places. So the warp factor stuff just makes my head hurt.
The bottom line with the warp speed is essentially whatever the plot needs it to be.
Yeah.
Is how fast the warp chart goes. And the higher the warp factor, the higher the drama factor for it.
as witnessed by the fact that in the range of sensors is also whatever the plot needs. But as witnessed by the fact that in Star Trek First Contact, the Enterprise E is close enough to the Romulan border that it's taking sensor readings inside the Romulan neutral zone, but it takes them 2 hours to get back to Earth.
Well, yeah, if you look here, right here, let's see here. There's my camera. So right here is Sol. Romulus is right over here. Oops, sorry, it's hard holding the book up like this. But anyways, the point is, Earth is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 50 light years from Romulus itself. So they're not that
really?
far. Yeah, at least according to the Star Charts book. So.
And
so
yet,
very close.
The Enterprise is always the only ship in the quadrant.
Yes, exactly. The Enterprise is, they kind of burned that one out in the movies, right?
Yeah.
It was the only ship available always. So they used that particular plot device a little too often.
Yeah, I was never a particularly big fan of that plot device. So,
yeah.
Oh, well. All right. So, Alec, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, we last night we had a conversation about was Lower Decks canon, right? The new, very popular cartoon of Star Trek, right?
Right.
My initial contention was it was not. It was not canon. It's cool, it's fun, but it's not canon. Just like the old animated series isn't canon. And a lot of, some of our team of pundits think it is canon. To which I said, well, there's stuff in there that would never be. I mean, you wouldn't see Riker acting the way he did in the last episode of Lower Decks. I mean, you just wouldn't. It's cool in the cartoon, but that's not the way he would act. One comment was, one of our people, I forgot who it was, said they view Lower Decks as a TV show in the Star Trek universe, meaning on Saturday nights, Worf grabs some prune juice and sits in front of the monitor and watches Lower Decks. And I thought that was really cool. Anyway, the way we kind of came out on it was, with everything that's happening with the new shows, with Discovery and all the crap that they threw at us, and Picard and now Lower Decks. And what's really happened is that, one, canon isn't canon. I mean, even if you say, look, canon is everything from TOS to Enterprise without the animated series. That's canon. And, and everything else is part of the multiverse. So Kurtzman universe is a separate universe, and Lower Decks is a separate universe, and the novels are a separate universe. The multiverse theory of Star Trek. What you basically wind up with is it's moving to a point, I think, where the only canon that's important is your personal head canon.
Yeah.
That's really what's important.
Yeah.
What do you think is Star Trek? Because you don't, because what is canon is kind of irrelevant. And I find it ironic that the thing you kept hearing from writers of Deep Space Nine especially was how oppressive canon was. That they kept saying, oh, God, we had to, we always have to reconcile this with everything that happened in TNG. And they really didn't like it. So what does Kurtzman do? He goes throw himself right in the middle of canon by saying it happened 20 years before TOS. And it's like, why didn't you go 20 years after Voyager and free yourself of canon? You could do whatever you want, which is what they've now done in the third season. So
they could have done the spore drive thing, and they're like, okay, you don't like it, but yeah.
But instead, they screwed with canon. Basically, is what they do. They're basically retconning things.
I find it's an interesting perspective about this is so limiting, because I've heard David Weber on a half dozen occasions talk about how while authors may not like limitations, the smart ones know that limitations actually lead to better story. Because if you don't have limitations, you can just, and then the space monkeys arrived and made everything better, right?
Right.
So the limitations should at some level function as preventing Deus Ex Machinas from being tempting to you. And I think the reason why canon gets oppressive to some of these writers is that they don't understand it. They've never learned it. For some of them, I think. And and the other thing is like, I think I've always thought the right approach with Star Trek is to both be in universe and out of universe at the same time, right? You need to recognize the fact that it was a TV show. And this is one of the things I was telling Pat earlier today. This is one of the things that always drove me nuts about Roddenberry, is that whenever anybody asked him a question, since he really didn't care about that sort of stuff, he just viewed it as part of the scene setting, he'd give these flippant answers to questions that later, people are trying to reconcile. Like when somebody asked him why the star dates aren't in order, he says, well, it takes into account your position in the universe and the speed of the ship, etc. When in reality, he should have just said, because the network doesn't play the shows in order.
Yeah.
Right? You're seeing the episodes out of order, right? He didn't have to come up with some stupid flippant reason. Similarly, I think while it made a great little scene in Deep Space Nine, the entire idea of having to explain the forehead ridges on the Klingons, I was perfectly cool with the idea of, when they did this back in the 1960s, the effects budget was a lot less. The makeup budget was a lot less, and it got better over time. And so we should just pretend that they always look that way. So I do think that Discovery kind of got it right with the original Enterprise, although I think they went a little bit overboard in the rip that system out, etc. They kind of got it right in that they had a design aesthetic that, for like the bridge, that evoked the original but wasn't shackled to it.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the right way to think about it. It evoked the original, but it didn't feel archaic because we are not the people of the 1960s. And what looked new and swanky to, Star Trek, I think, Star Trek went off in 68, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So I was 3 when Star Trek went off. What looked new and swanky to my parents now would look archaic if we showed it now.
I think that the challenge there, which we've talked about so many times, is that if you make a decision to do what Discovery did with the Enterprise, that's all well and good. That is is, as they were calling it, a visual reboot. And I totally get it. We have said the reason the Ares bridge looks like, you look at it and you go, get it, it's TOS era. It looks a little different, but man, that's TOS, right?
Yep.
We could do that. because we're a fan film, right? We're appealing to one audience, which is Star Trek fans. But you could never do what we're doing. I mean, if CBS had come to its senses and said, Alec, why don't you make the next Star Trek TV series, and given us a budget, the Ares Bridge wouldn't look like what we made. Mm-hmm. It would look like probably we would have to do something like the Enterprise Bridge. I get that. I think the challenge then is for all of us who are these crazy Star Trek geeks reconciling canon. It's just very difficult, and it's just easier. It's just so much easier as JJ did so well at the urging of Robert Orsi, is to say this is an alternate universe. And if Kurtzman had just done that, or had simply placed, I mean, if he wanted to have the Enterprise, and if he just said, look, this is an alternate timeline, no one would be bitching about it. But since he's saying, no, this is in the prime timeline, us geeks are trying to reconcile, but how does that Enterprise become Kirk's Enterprise? Because we know what Kirk's Enterprise, right? That's the challenge. And so the CBS and Kurtzman are basically asking us to basically set aside the way we think about Star Trek. That's what they're asking us to do.
Yeah,
and if I could let me just finish the point.
Sure.
So what we decided last night, what we kind of came to last night was, you know what? Screw it all. Worrying about canon is self-defeating. And what we really need to do is just focus on enjoying Star Trek.
Yeah, my basic attitude is there's over 700 hours of Star Trek. No one's going to like all of it. Yeah. Take what you like and enjoy it. If you don't if you love Deep Space Nine, but you don't like Discovery, then you don't have to flush all the Deep Space Nine stuff down the toilet because they made a show you didn't like. Ignore it and move on. So, I as I understand it, the new Discovery is out. I haven't seen it yet. I've heard rumors of people are not real happy with it, but the internet hates everything anyways. So
I mean, I watched Discovery, and it was actually kind of growing on me until I got to the last 2 episodes of the second season, and that convinced me that I just didn't see myself as paying the money to CBS to, I wasn't going to pay for the privilege of watching it, because I thought
season 2, but I thought season 2 was quite good, and the Pike character was good, and he added a lot to the show. So
I think he really,
I think I like Pike. I like number 1. I like what they did with Spock.
Yep. Thought it was all good. I can just, I just don't have to watch that battle, that climactic battle, at the end, because the other thing is Enterprise of that era had a crew of 203. I believe they had about 200 fighters out there. So I don't know who was manning all of those fighters.
The fighters was a problem. The photon torpedo and the blast door was a problem. The doors covering the random bit of damage in the passageway was a problem. And the from a design standpoint, the fact that every time they get into an elevator, every time they get into a turbo lift, apparently most of the Enterprise, like 98% of the Enterprise, is empty space.
I know. I just hate that.
It drives me crazy. And so, I mean, I think.
What do you mean? It's giant brewery
on its own terms. I don't have to dislike it because it doesn't fit in with canon. I concluded with Discovery I can dislike it on its own terms. And, same thing was kind of with the JJ verse. One of the things that really bothered me about the JJ movies, I would have been happier if they would have just said, we're rebooting. Yeah. I would have been much happier than the idea that, anytime Earth is attacked through time travel, we have to defend Earth, and Spock's right there going back in time to help defend Earth. Vulcan gets wasted.
That's just the JJ universe for you. Things are a lot more disposable in his universe than the others.
And I will also freely admit, I came to the conclusion a while ago that I think that Star Trek is better on the small screen.
Yes, it absolutely is. You can absolutely make that case. I mean, I enjoy the movies. However, I think there's a lot to be said for Star Trek being on the small screen because it doesn't then require you to have the big bad guy that you're fighting.
Yeah.
Right. The Star Trek: The Motion Picture is in essence a two-part episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it is something that it is all about The reason so many people like that movie, the hardcore fans, is because it's Star Trek. It really is. Whereas really Wrath of Khan really gets you into, that's where Star Trek starts becoming the baddie of the week. Then you have Kruge in Star Trek 3, and then Star Trek 4 is more Star Trek-y, right? Solving a problem. Star Trek 5 is, I totally agree that Star Trek is meant for the small screen. The other thing that I want to say about all of this is that I think when we focus so much on canon, which I get caught up in too, we then cause problems for ourselves as fans. And so we really need to think of it rather than canon. I think if we can all just say multiverse, and this is my headcanon. My headcanon includes Axanar. My headcanon includes Enterprise, but my headcanon doesn't include Discovery. Or however you want to work it, if you just relax, forget about canon and say, what's headcanon? And then you're going to have a lot less stress in your life. And you're going to be yelling at Kurtzman a lot less. And the other thing about Kurtzman, just in his defense, is that, again, all modern Star Trek, the first two seasons always kind of suck, right? Yeah. So if we look at Discovery 1 and 2 as Kurtzman's first two seasons, Picard's season 3. Picard's a pretty good. I love Picard. I thought that was good. So it's whether you like what they did with Picard or not, it's still pretty good Star Trek. So again, give Kurtzman some time. I know he's doing things that are different, and a lot of people don't like it, but that's my take.
I have a little bit of a problem with we're going to have lots and lots of fighters because Star Wars has fighters and fighters are cool.
I'm with you.
So yeah,
that's Battlestar Galactica. That's Star Wars. That's not Star Trek.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that if they showed season 1 of The Next Generation now, if that came out now, all the fans would lose their minds just as badly as they did for Discovery. Absolutely. Even more so, because frankly, Discovery season 1 was way better than season 1 of Star Trek.
When Star Trek The Next Generation came out, I stopped watching after about the 4th or 5th episode of TNG and didn't start watching it again until somebody mentioned it. I was at a Games Workshop store actually, and somebody mentioned it, and I sort of went, "Yeah, Star Trek," and they went, "No, really, it's gotten good." And I went, "Really?" And they said, "Yeah, really, it's gotten good. You need to go watch it. It's good now." Yeah. And so I tagged back in season 3, and they were right. It was good.
Frankly, I think it got better when Ronald D. Moore got involved. I think he was at least part of spicing the show up a little bit.
Yeah, I can't remember if he came in at season 3 or season 4. Yeah. I want to say it was sometime around there. And there was a time period, I just read this recently, where like he came in and his freshman year on the show, at the end of his freshman year, basically all the other writers left. And so he then comes back, and he's the senior experienced guy, and he's been there 1 year.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, listen, and again, getting back to what I said earlier, Ron Moore is one of those guys who said, and by the way, this is my godson, Justin.
Hello, Justin.
He's like, what the hell are you doing? So many writers over and over you hear how oppressive canon was, but again, which is why I just found it so shocking that Kurtzman decided to basically tie themselves to canon. I mean, why did you want to do that? The writers are telling you, we don't want to have you tied by canon. Give yourself the freedom to do whatever the hell you want to do. I mean, that's my big problem with Kurtzman. It's that he made a bad show running decision. Let's just say, not that and besides, whoever he hired as production designer needed to be fired because the Klingon sucked. other than that,
Yeah.
I can deal with everything, and we can argue about Michael Burnham and how the show is, but I just don't understand why they decided to place that show in TOS time frame. It just made no sense to me. But anyway, that's canon. We're talking a little bit about canon. So again, we can talk about all this stuff about warp speed and whatever, and whether it's warp speed or it's costumes or it's whatever, oh well, how come all the inconsistencies, right? I mean, all the little inconsistencies in the show. You're like, well, with the patches, is that Enterprise patch for the entire Starfleet, or does every ship have its own patch? All those things you can either rack your brains about and drive yourself nuts saying this is canon, or you can say, you know what, it's part of Star Trek, and I'm just going to enjoy it. And it's my head canon. I
think there's a good way to sort of decide if something matters or not. And the good way to decide if something matters or not is, if I introduce this, does it raise questions about what's come before? Like if all of a sudden it turns out that Worf has the ability to move at super speed, why didn't he do that before? Right? There's all sorts of situations where that would have been useful before. And that's where I think canon is useful. Canon keeps you grounded and prevents the Deus Ex Machina effect. So yeah, did the uniforms, are the uniforms consistent? Okay, well, mostly's probably good enough, right? For a lot of, mostly's probably good enough. But when you sort of like all of a sudden you introduce some radical new capability at least most of the time Star Trek has the good graces that either Geordie LaForge or Montgomery Scott has to jury rig something that's like, in danger, like, okay, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, it may just blow up the ship, but it's our only option, so we're going to do it, right? So they can generally pull something away, but there even then there's times where it's like that would be really obvious. Why hasn't somebody else been able to pull that off before? And I would probably be, just for my own headcanon, I'd be a little happier. Maybe I should just assume they did this. I'd be a little happier where they said, well, we could do X. It's in the appendix to the manual. And they tell us that you should never play around with that because like it'll void the warranty or something. But we could do it. If you're willing to void the warranty, if you're willing to sign off on this, boss, we'll go ahead and void the warranty, right? Okay, I can sort of make that work. I decided a while back that I've started referring to my favorite version of Star Trek is Star Trek SO, and the SO stands for Sternbach Okuda. At least in terms of sort of thinking about how all the pieces go together, because as I frequently say, I'm a naval analyst. When I see a Navy, I analyze it. When I see Starfleet, I analyze it. I want to be able to sort of talk about the capabilities of Starfleet, what they can and can't do, and how all the pieces fit together, et cetera, et cetera. And to some degree, you need a certain level of consistency to be able to sort of figure out how it works. Star Trek is a complex machine, and I want to know how it works.
Well, and to your point, which is really good, is in the book Kobayashi Maru, it talks about how each of the TOS crew who went through the Kobayashi Maru, how they dealt with it. And the great part is the way Scotty, what Scotty does. He actually, I think in the book, he actually beats the Kobayashi Maru, but the way he does it is he basically puts photon torpedoes at certain points between the three Klingon ships where their shields meet. He basically puts a photon torpedo there, and they explode with devastating consequences. And afterwards, they're like, "Wait a second, what? Why don't we do that in practice?" And Scotty's like, "Well, it doesn't really work in practice. It only works in the computer. No one can ever figure out why this actually doesn't work in real life." But it works in the simulation, and that's why I did it. And they flunk them or whatever. And I thought I was like, that's kind of like, so it speaks to what you're talking about. Like, you don't come up with that solution if you could have done it, you know.
And it also sort of highlights, going back to the warp speed chart, it highlights the fact that Star Trek has never been able to get time distance stuff correct. And space is a lot bigger than they think it is. And you see that.
Again, who actually goes, wait a second, they said it was going to take them 3 weeks at Warp 7, but if according to this chart, no one actually, if you're doing that, you're missing the point of Star Trek.
Yeah, there is that. But I mean, then I'd be happier if they stopped giving me numbers. If you don't tell me that you're just, you know, if you don't prove to me that you're just throwing numbers out there and you've never thought it through, then I feel better.
Well, and that,
keep it vague.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I could, you know, you could figure out how fast they went in various episodes. Like, if we assume that Star Charts is correct, it's like I think 150 light years or something to get to Kronos. But they talk about it being a 3-day trip at Warp 5 for Enterprise in the first episode. I think it was like a 3-day trip. I could have my numbers mixed up a little bit, but either way, you know, that was a 6-month trip according to the warp chart of 214, you know, light years per year. And it was, you know, 150, 180 light years or something like that. So it's a 6 to 9 month trip. So if it's a 3-day trip, well, that's a much bigger difference in speeds there all of a sudden. So,
yeah.
And I know I believe there's an explanation somewhere, you know, and this falls into the hand wavium explanation of, you know, depends on the location and space where they're at. And there are places where warp means different speeds and stuff like that. But apparently that's anywhere it needs to be. So,
yeah. And, you know, it's not like Star Trek is the only show that has its problems. It's not like it's only science fiction. Right. I seem to recall in the movie The Great Escape, Steve McQueen escapes on a motorcycle and some other people escape in an airplane, and they're traveling at approximately the same speed.
Well, if it's an old Piper Cub, they would be. That motorcycle might actually be faster.
Mark Weiser, we're talking not about subjective canon is what's commonly called head canon. It's your personal view of what canon is. And I have really come down on the fact that is the way to look at canon. It talking about what is canon is the wrong question. The question is, what is canon to you and why? And once you deal with that, you get right to the subject of what do you enjoy.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. So that's why I'm, you know, I really come to this literally while we were doing the show last night. I really started to realize that that's where we really should be focused.
I was going to say, I really only, you know, most of the times when I'm talking about canon, it's not in terms of that episode is wrong. It's more in terms of this is why I am or am not going to include it in the mental model that I'm creating to explain how this works. Right? It's more about me as an analyst. You know, I'm an analyst in my day job. It's more about me as an analyst assessing the quality of the data when I'm trying to fit all the pieces of the data together and create the model of what's going on. And so, you know, it's like Sternbach and Okuda says X, and they lay out a nice consistent explanation about how it all works, etc. And then there's this other piece over here that doesn't seem to fit. I'm more than willing to just ignore the other piece that doesn't seem to fit. And I've seen people just contort themselves into knots to make everything fit. And, you know, sometimes you get bad data. Right? You get a cloud of data, you draw a line through it, right? You do your best to draw a line through it. And that's what I'm doing. I'm drawing a line through it. And I'm trying to figure out what's experimental error and what isn't. And so my own headcanon about all of it is that what we're watching is contemporaneous TV shows that are made in that time period. And so the budget of that original Star Trek made during that time, for some reason, the budgets in the 23rd century were like old 1960s BBC budgets.
Yeah.
Right? It's like watching old Doctor Who. They just didn't have good budgets when they made their story about Starfleet, and the guys who made that show didn't fully understand Starfleet, so they got some stuff wrong, and that's okay.
And another good example of this, what you say about contorting yourself to fit it into canon, I think, is if you read the Enterprise Romulan War novels, right? Mm-hmm. Under the Raptor's Wing, and then I forgot what the other one was. Anyway, what they talk about the Romulan telepresence device that takes control of the ships, and how are they going to beat that? And so basically the author does that contortion. He does that contortion because he then decides he's going to reconcile why the Enterprise looks at, in the NX-01 looks more advanced than NCC 1701, right? And that has never bothered me. I mean, it has never bothered. I absolutely see how you can get from NX-01 to NCC 1701 in 100 years. I absolutely get that. I mean, because you're simplifying the designs and all, right? Whatever. So he contorts it and ties in the Romulan telepresence device and has this whole like sea story running through where the engineers trying to combat the Romulan telepresence device decide they basically have to go, they basically have to make Starship ships more like the Galactica and less like the Pegasus. And so he's basically saying, okay, it's all got to be analog. We've got to make this stuff like really analog so that the Romulans can't hack into it. And I'm just like, okay, that's just the stupidest. You don't regress your technology in order. And he even says at one point, we're probably going to have to use toggle switches and, or something like that. And I'm like, that's just the stupidest idea. You're not going to do that. You're going to advance your technology past them. That's what you're going to do. There is that with better technology. I mean, no one ever said, oh man, those heat-seeking missiles, maybe we should go back to flying, Sopwith camels. I mean,
it's stuff like that eventually, there was a time period where I started reading Star Trek novels, and I outgrew that because of things like that. And every now and then there'll be a novel that, I read the description of it and I go, you know what, I'm going to make an exception. I'm going to read that one. And even the good ones, there's always some elements where there's too much. Like there's one that's either mortal coil or immortal coil that ties together Data and his creator and Flint and the spin robots, the spin androids with Ted Cassidy, and like 3 or 4 other things all in one. They're all related, and they all there's and then we're gonna do a call out to this episode and a call out to this episode and take these and put and every now and then you get something like the idea that the Doomsday Machine was built to fight the Borg. I kind of liked. That was a cool idea.
Yeah, that was a great idea.
And you didn't have to write a novel to convince me that Trelane was a juvenile Q. I thought about that almost immediately.
Absolutely, right.
But some of these other ones where it's just like, anytime they mention a computer, all those computer episodes must be related. So I'll write a novel that ties together every single reference to a computer in Star Trek. It's like, no, you don't need to do that. And they just they try too hard. In a lot of ways, they just try too hard. And I know that it at least used to be the case that there was heavy editorial interference, shall we say? Because I remember that one author of a Star Trek novel, if you walked up to her and said, would you please sign my copy of your novel? She'd say, I'll sign page 136. And they'd say, why 136? And it's because that's the only page that's actually my page. Everything else, they change this and they change that, etc. 136 is the only page that exists as I wrote it.
By the way, I do want to...
yes, my bad flirting.
I do want to say that one of the things everyone yesterday was talking about the great job that Lower Decks does bringing in other things from Star Trek. I mean, it's basically the Star Trek show that's brought in the most other canon pieces, right, or other elements. And I haven't seen the last episode, but I saw this and I said it was freaking brilliant. And this is a piece of Star Trek that they've canonized in Lower Decks canon, which I thought was great. And I'm going to share this now because I couldn't stop laughing when I saw this. Everyone's recognized that helmet. That is the worst Star Trek toy ever made. That is
yes,
the Spock helmet. Here, let me.
Pretty impressive when they're bringing in toys.
Yeah, right. I mean, I just saw this and I said, "Oh my God, that is just simply amazing." That this is. But let's show that. Let me show that for you guys.
Oh, that's right. Andy said about that weaponized nostalgia. The Spock helmet.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it was the stupidest toy. Even me as a kid, I was like, that's the stupidest piece of shit I've ever seen. But the fact that they were able to bring it in to Lower Decks is kind of fun. I mean, that's really funny. That's you got to give them credit. That's really, really brilliant. So I think they're doing a great. I'm going to revisit Lower Decks because I only made it halfway through the first episode and I was like, oh man, it was a little too loud for me, which makes me sound really old. But I was like, wasn't my thing. But now I got to go back because everyone loves it so much. I've heard so many good things. I'm going to go back and watch the whole thing.
I want to say, wasn't there some equivalent thing with the Star Wars Holiday Special that that somebody worked the Star Wars Holiday Special into like a fan film or something?
That never happened. That's been expunged from the Lucasfilm.
It has been expunged. Yeah, I know. It really has. So that's it. But listen, we had I made the last second decision to add this to the Axanar channel as well, and we're doing. I mean, we're over 100 viewers. Thank you. There's 57 here on the Axanar channel. Listen, I do want to say, everyone, please subscribe to the Axanar YouTube channel. We are so close to hitting 90,000 subscribers. So please, if you can all check, if you are not already a subscriber to the Axanar channel, please subscribe and hit the notifications icon. Please also then go check out the Aries Studios channel because we have live streams every day of the week. Different live streams. Two Geek Girls is on Thursdays and Sundays. Axanar Confidential is on Fridays. This show, Starfleet Tactical, is on Saturdays. And then Axanar After Dark fills in the other days. So yeah, please. We're about 25 subscribers short of 90,000, which will be a very, that's a big milestone for us. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do. We're nearing the end times here. And I think it sounds to me like everyone's kind of, I think everyone has either thrown their hands up about what is canon, or I think more and more people are just like embracing the horror. And I think that's where we need to be. I think we need to be less geeky fans and more lovers of Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably do better because of it.
I think you're right.
Chris, were we supposed to talk about something else this week?
We're going to talk about worship design.
Well, I guess we're going to be doing that next week, huh?
That works. Let me see if there's. Let me take a look real quick and see if I've got anything fast. Oh, I got one fast thing. Hold on a second.
Go for it. We can go through the pyramids next week. Oh.
Okay, so
this is cool.
All right. So it's showing again. Okay, so I talked at some point about the 1975 ship reclassification scheme, et cetera, and I want to talk a little bit more about that because I think it's important to sort of understand, since since Franz Joseph and Gene Roddenberry were borrowing from the real world, it's important to understand that. And part of that, it talks about what happened to the class known as destroyer escorts. And I think it's worth just spending a minute just sort of thinking about what the difference is between a destroyer versus a destroyer escort, and how can you tell what you're looking at. So if you look at this, okay, the ships on the left are both destroyers. The ones on the right are destroyer escorts, and those destroyers are a little bit bigger. They're all World War II era. The ones they're a little bit bigger. You'll see that the one has 3 turrets and the other one has 5. Versus 2 and I think it's 2 and 2 on those. So it's got more guns, but that's not the thing that I notice right away on this. The thing that I notice right away is fire control. Okay, and because I noticed this first on, there's a couple of big ship models in the lobby of McCarty Little Hall at the Naval War College. And by big, I mean they're like 6-foot long ship models of, I want to say one's a Fletcher, if I remember correctly, and one is one of the destroyer escort classes. So the destroyers have centralized fire control. This is a turret that does not have, has guys in it, doesn't have guns, but what it does have is a radar on the top. And it's got binocular, stereoscopic vision, right? So that black thing coming out of the side of that turret in the middle, that's half of a binocular system. And so you get the 2 ends far apart, and that gives you a lot of parallax. So you can, the purpose of that is to determine the range. And you don't see those on destroyer escorts because destroyer escorts really aren't about firing their gun. And when they fire their gun, it's all local control. Whereas for a destroyer, they've got these things on them. And so fire control is one of those things, like I think I said once before, it's sort of hard to see fire control. This is one of the few instances where you can see fire control. And it's not just destroyers. Oh, by the way, if you look on the bottom destroyer, you'll see in front of that turret, the rearmost turret, there are torpedo tubes, and there's what looks like a water tank on top of the torpedo tubes. And I used to see that on the model and go, what is that thing? And the answer is you can hand crank the torpedo tubes around. There's a position on top of them for somebody to get up there and hand crank them around. That thing that he would climb inside to hand crank it around, its purpose is that if they're firing the guns, it protects them from the blast of their own weapons.
Oh.
So it's intended to protect the guy cranking it around.
Oh,
but this same sort of stuff applies for battleships.
And by the way, maybe I missed it because I know my internet went out for a second there. What's the difference between a destroyer and a destroyer escort?
So destroyer escorts are, I didn't really talk about missions. Destroyer escorts are really anti-submarine warfare platforms more than anything else, whereas destroyers do that, and then they also do like torpedo attacks, etc. If you go back to this one, you can see that the destroyer escort, the rudder row, has those torpedo tubes. So it's not just whether they carry torpedoes or not. But the big difference is the fire control, is that turret on top that gives them the ability to do centralized fire control and have all the guns shooting at the same top, same target.
The navigational deflector.
I'm sorry, what? No, yeah.
Deflector.
Yeah, later on they turned it into that.
So the destroyers have centralized fire control and the destroyer escorts do not.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, also, there was something, again, I've learned through World of Warships, but there were destroyer leaders, like in the game, it's the Somers class, I believe.
So destroyer leaders are basically larger, and they have, what makes them larger is they have a command staff on board, like the admiral or the destroyer squadron leader. It's probably a destroyer squadron leader. So a post-command captain, a post-command 06 with his staff that is responsible for controlling a large group of ships. So they need an extra staff space on board.
Got it.
And so and so light cruisers would frequently function as destroyer leaders. So you'd have a bunch of destroyers and then a light cruiser. But we sometimes built special destroyer leaders they were basically slightly bigger destroyers. So this also applies to battleships. So here is the USS Massachusetts. I picked this particular ship because it is the battleship that I am most familiar with, because it's the one I've spent more time on USS Massachusetts than all the other battleships combined, because I lived in Newport and it was in Fall River, Massachusetts, about a 45-minute drive away. So I'd go up about every 6 to 9 months.
I've seen that. Yep.
And yeah, it's a cool ship, and you can go all over it. I mean, basically, you can just run rampant. You can go down to the magazine. You can go into the inner turrets mechanism. You can go climb inside a turret and see all that other stuff. But one of the things that I noticed is that it's got a lot of command and control capability itself. Specifically, all these things are those turrets, right? So you've got the tall one in the top. That's known as Spot 1. That's the main turret for the main fire control turret. So the fire control, whoever the lead fire control guy is, he's up there. Then Spot 2 is the one towards the aft that sort of looks a little bit different. It looks a little like it's maybe a little bit more armored. That's because it's more armored. And that's sort of the backup, although they can split it up if they need to because of the different sectors of the ship. And then those other ones that you see are usually used for the smaller 5-inch guns, which are basically for defense against torpedo attack craft, and for use for anti-aircraft. And so they would basically be split up with, they divide the ship into four sectors, and they would control them that way. But if they had to, I think, if I remember correctly, they could take over. And if you look at those top views for Spot 1 and Spot 2, you can see that they've got huge binocular sights. They've got the things sticking out from the sides are those binocular sights, and they're like, they're a huge distance apart, so they can do range finding to a very long distance. And so, that's what a late era battleship looks like. If you go back and look at battleships earlier, in the 1890s, you didn't see those positions. World War I, you might see positions that had those sights, but they weren't necessarily armored turrets like that. And all that fire control stuff was sort of coming on board during World War I. I mean, Dreadnought was really the first ship that sort of integrated all that stuff, but it took them a while to sort of decide on what the final form factor of that was going to be. And so it was continuously changing over time. And some ships had much better gunnery than others as a result of it. So fire control is one of those things that really is a game changer. When the battleship era started, if you were getting hits at 4,000 yards, you were doing pretty good. By the time it ended, you're getting hits at 25,000 yards.
Wow.
And the funny thing about it is, your hit rate is about 3 to 6% throughout that entire time period, but that's because you're not solving for hit rate in the equation. You're solving for range. So about 3 to 6% was where people were comfortable with. And so that's where battles had a tendency to take place, assuming that you had the visibility to do it. Like in Jutland, the North Atlantic has such crappy weather, and if you're doing it at night, in fog or whatever, you may actually end up being a lot closer than that, because visibility had a tendency to sort of drive your range also. But when people say that battleship gunnery never improved, it's like, okay, you don't understand what's the dependent and the independent variable in this equation. So that's what I have to say about fire control.
All right. Well, we'll take that as the lead in into next week's conversation about, which is about
next week I'll go into some detail about Balance of Terror next week.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the battle and even some of the canon issues and stuff like that. I was going to segue into that, but we never quite got there. So, yeah, we'll do that next week and whatever else we come up with.
Awesome. Well, great discussion tonight. I want to thank everyone. We had a lot of people in tonight. Thank you. We still have a lot of people. Listen, two things. One, this all happens because Aries Studios has a Patreon campaign, and we're being you guys are being very generous. And I know we've fallen off a little. We've lost about $300 so far in the past 6 months because of COVID. I know one of our big sponsors is falling off because lost his job. So anything you can do, you can go down here to the Aries Studio store and buy cool Axanar swag. And the other thing is to go to our Patreon. Down there you can see patreon.com/Aries Studios and become a member of Aries Studios for $2, $5, $10 a month. This month, all the donors got a free patch. Last month, they got a free coffee mug. So we do little things like this from time to time. We're going to be offering cool discounts only to Patreon members also. So please check out our Patreon. Check out the Aries Studio store because there's all sorts of cool Axanar swag there. And thank you. Thank you for everyone who buys something, donates something. Thank you. You're keeping Axanar going. You're keeping Aries Studios going. I know tomorrow I'm meeting Jeff Fagan, our DP, and we're going to be discussing, the upcoming shoots, which we're real excited about. So thank you all. We really appreciate it. This is all a lot of fun, and we love Star Trek, and we love making Axanar. So please check out the decommissioning video on our YouTube channel if you haven't already. It's been great. We launched it this morning. I think we're already over 5,000 views or close to it. So thank you very much, everyone who's done that. And again, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the notifications, the bell icon to get your notifications, and stay tuned because we got more coming. Let's see. The decommissioning video is already over 5,000 views, so that's kind of cool. Thank you very much. That is an awesome start to a little short that we basically what amounted to a camera test. And we remain 24 short of 90,000 subscribers. So hopefully we'll have that by this time next week. So anything else before we sign off, Chris, Pat?
My cat really wants some attention.
Nope. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Live long and prosper, and we will see you next week, same time here for Starfleet Tactical. Thanks so much, guys.
All right.
See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.